The Earth has been explored from one pole to the other, but an unknown frontier remains: the human body. What are the limits of its ability to withstand cold? Can they be pushed even further? Strange barriers protect our cells from the assault of freezing cold, yet they are fragile and sometimes give way. But the biggest mystery of all is the invisible thread that maintains some people alive while abandoning others to the land of white death. Walking to the North Pole is still one of the most dangerous challenges imaginable. The trip must start at the end of winter, when the ice is still frozen solid. The nights are long and glacial. Temperatures plunge to -30, -40, and even -60 degrees Celsius. In a blizzard, the smallest surface of the skin exposed to the wind freezes in just a few minutes. The temperature can feel like -100 degrees. Every gesture in these inhuman conditions must be planned, learned, repeated, and performed to perfection. Any error can be fatal. Adventurer Mike Horn learned this the hard way during his attempt to reach the North Pole. Suffering from frostbite on his nose and fingers, he sent out an SOS. When he made contact with rescue teams, the temperature was -62 degrees.
And then after the coldest, I think, was -62. And you know, I have nothing.
Dr. Cauchy, a specialist in cold-induced pathologies, examined him immediately in the air.
Le stade 2, c'est simplement des bulles, mais tu gardes des doigts intègres. Et le stade 1, ce sont juste les gelures qui disparaissent tout de suite après un
first degree is just frostness,
C'est quand même un
which
stade
disappears
3, mais
immediately after they're warmed
il
up.
est quand même de bons
This is a
pronostics.
third
On va essayer
degree.
de récupérer tout
The
ça.
prognosis is good.
Et là, le
We'll
mal est
try to
déjà fait,
recover
hein.
all this.
Il peut être très actif
Here
quand
the
on
damage has
récupère
already been done. We have to intervene
des
very
gelures.
quickly when treating
Non,
frostbite.
on a 48 heures.
We have 48 hours. If you've just come in from the cold, we have
on a
48 hours
48 heures
during which we
dans
can
lesquelles on peut
intervene.
être actif.
Thanks to Dr. Cauchy's avant-garde treatments, Mike Horn's fingers were saved. This time, at least.
Moi, en tant que médecin, je te dis, il
As
ne
a
faut pas
doctor, I'll
retourner.
tell you, don't go back.
Voilà.
Then you do
Après
as
ça,
you
tu fais ce
like.
que tu veux.
I don't believe you. You don't want to stay home either.
No.
Est-ce que tu coupes? Tu fais le plein.
Are you filling up?
No, we're not filling up. If they're freezing up top, we're going straight there.
Bon, bah, ok, on
Okay,
arrive,
we're on our way.
Emmanuel Cauchy is an emergency doctor at the Chamonix Hospital. Adventure is part of his daily work life. He travels with rescue teams in the Mont Blanc Massif, providing first aid to mountaineers in trouble. He is also a mountain guide and loves to climb on his days off. He knows better than anyone else the pitfalls that too often entrap hapless climbers.
Ouais, allez-y, hein, c'est bon. Hein.
It's okay, go ahead.
Là, il a 2
He's
mètres du
2
bord,
meters
donc
from the
c'est
edge.
bon. Tiens, on va l'aider un peu.
We'll help him a little.
Ça va? Ça va?
You okay?
Ton prénom, tu m'as dit?
What's your name?
J'ai une douleur là. Ouais, c'est bon.
They already put the collar on you, that's good.
Tu prends ta
I'll
salle.
measure his saturation to see if he's breathing well. He's a bit cold though.
Voilà, respire
Okay,
bien.
breathe deeply.
Dr. Cauchy is fascinated by the enigmas of cold.
Ok,
Why
tu me
does
dis,
one injured
j'entends
person
pas. Ça va là?
withstand the
Sur rien?
cold
Ok.
and another cool down so fast he becomes hypothermic? What
Ouais, toi,
secrets do
35,
our
ça
bodies
va, tu vois,
use
t'as
to
encore,
defend themselves? When cold, our bodies react by forming a sort of protective shell. It lets the external sheath cool down and redirects warm blood to the head and trunk to protect the vital organs. They need a temperature of 35 degrees Celsius to function. Hypothermia begins below this threshold. Dropped off to the hospital at the same time as the injured climber, Dr. Cauchy has just enough time to change his clothes before meeting him again in the operating room. In 10 minutes, the doctor has accompanied the hypothermic victim from one world to another, from death to life. People suffering from hypothermia are as fragile as glass. The wrong move can result in heart failure. If warmed up carefully, they can come through with no after effects. Frostbite is another destructive weapon of cold. A foot, a hand, or even an entire limb can turn numb and stiff. But frozen tissue is not always doomed. The healing process depends on revascularization. It's a fascinating field for research into new treatments. To explore the effects of cold exposure, Dr. Cauchy formulated a test using a friend exposed to forced immersion during his polar expeditions. Plunging into nearly freezing water is cataclysmic to our bodies. A spasm can block breathing or cause cardiac arrest. Then, if the victim survives, his body cools down 25 times faster than in air at the same temperature. Hypothermia occurs in just a few minutes. All polar explorers train for this catastrophe. Dr. Cauchy is trying to better understand the mechanisms that determine survival or death.
There is a moment when the body reaches the limits of its ability to defend itself. It appears that there are people who withstand the cold and others who don't know how to. Currently, we have a lot of suppositions. All men are not equal in the cold. We would like to understand the difference between those who are able to withstand for a long time and those who weaken very quickly.
Et puis ceux qui dépérissent très vite.
Why do some people withstand the cold and others not? Dr. Cauchy had the opportunity of exploring the enigma of cold exposure on his own body. It was a dozen years ago in a remote region of Nepal, the Dolpo. It was a life-altering experience. He had been hired as a doctor for the shooting of Himalaya, the film directed by Eric Valli. For several months, he monitored the health of the crew, living in severely cold conditions at altitudes of 3,000 to 5,000 meters. If a single person fell ill, shooting would have to stop.
We've almost got it there. The shoulder of the coat just has to drop. 10 degrees, even less.
It's like kids in France. When they have diarrhea, it's often due to ear infection.
The nomads he treated late into the night were perfectly acclimatized to the cold. The film crew, though, had a hard time getting used to it.
C'est mieux, on soigne. C'est mieux.
In the Himalayas, the villages and monasteries up to an altitude of 4,000 meters are occupied all year round. Here, living in -20-degree conditions is not considered anything special. The cold is just part of everyday life. But don't be deluded by these expressionless faces and rustic clothes. For the Westerner, the cold here is severe.
I'd really like to try to climb a small summit just behind there. The day before yesterday, I went around to the other side. It looks like the descent down the back would be easy. Here, it's probably an easy climb.
One morning, Emmanuel Cauchy was restless. He left his doctoring duties and set off to climb the mountain with the lyrical name of Kanji Rolawe, an unclimbed peak rising 6,000 meters. He wasn't any better equipped than the inhabitants of this poor region. Hiking shoes, no ice axe or crampons, and lightweight clothes. That was the challenge. As he climbed higher towards the colder layers of the atmosphere, the doctor felt stark naked and happy. He was a guide and in good shape, but he didn't yet know that the most vital tool he would need would be his expertise in exposure to cold. He climbed alone, without ropes, and didn't let a vertical rock face stop him. He mastered this obstacle, but it would be impossible to descend on this side at least. Yet the mountain climbing doctor wasn't worried. The summit beckoned. Concentrating on the climb, he didn't feel the cold, though the temperature had dropped by 20 degrees since he left the base camp. As he took the last few steps towards the summit, he was already savoring the pleasure to come, setting foot on an unclimbed peak. The secret dream of every mountain climber. But as he looked out over the other side, his happiness evaporated. Where he had expected to find an easy descent, all he could see were jagged slopes of ice, plunging vertically downwards. Without crampons or an ice axe, he made one last-ditch effort. He tried to force his way over the steep ice by carving tiny steps with 2 stones he had picked up on the summit. A single false step, and he would tumble 1,000 meters to his death. But the way out was blocked. Unable to climb down, the mountaineer returned to the summit. He was trapped, though he still tried desperately to find ways to escape. But the gaping mouths of the crevices brought him back to reality. He knew all too well what would happen if he failed. A fall is either followed by death or by hypothermic shock. How many dead bodies had he already pulled out from the bottom of crevices like these? He knew exactly what was waiting for him. An interminable night, perhaps his last.
Au fond de moi-même, je me suis
Deep
dit,
inside, I told myself,
tu l'as cherché,
you
maintenant,
wanted
maintenant
it.
défends-toi.
Now deal
quoi.
with it.
Si au fond de toi-même,
If you
tu as
had
vraiment
really
voulu le
wanted
faire,
to do
tu
it,
t'es
challenge
provoqué,
yourself,
c'est que
it
tu dois
means
être
you must be able to
quelque
handle
part
it.
capable de
So go
défendre.
ahead.
Alors vas-y, à
You
toi de jouer
thought you were
maintenant.
so smart.
T'as fait le
So
malin,
go on.
vas-y.
Show us what you can do.
Montre-nous ce que tu sais faire, quoi.
The doctor in him remembered that it was minus 10 degrees in the middle of the night at the camp. He calculated that 2,000 meters higher, he would have to withstand temperatures of 30 degrees below zero. When it's that cold, falling asleep means death. The day's filming was over, and the crew was enjoying dinner in a warm tent. No one had yet noticed the doctor's absence.
Il y avait un embouteillage de yak dans tout le village. Donc il est déjà... on peut pas...
In the moonlight, his wife Cecile looked for his silhouette on the snowy slopes. She wasn't yet worried. Emmanuel had spent many, many nights alone in the mountains. He knew all about bivouacs. But here, there were no sleeping bags, just a pair of lightweight pants, handyman gloves, and a jacket the wind had already penetrated. The doctor would have to put his own medical advice to the test, on himself this time. He determined a strategy for the upcoming 12 hours, the longest of his life. To conserve every last calorie, find shelter from the wind, keep moving so that his muscles could produce enough heat to keep his protective reflexes running.
C'est encore un combat au début qui se joue à la loyale, c'est-à-dire que le froid pénètre un peu partout, la peau se refroidit, les sensations sont là, et puis le corps répond par des frissons, ou bien nous répondons par des mouvements pour essayer de réchauffer la température centrale. Mais quelque part, on a une agression, une réponse qui s'équilibre.
The thermal camera reveals the cold areas, his unprotected face and the thin clothing. Sensors all over the body send thermal information to the hypothalamus. This part of the brain acts as a thermostat, which then sends instructions to heat up certain sections of the body. In the winter, Tibetan monasteries are freezing. The monks have only yak wool blankets and yak butter tea to maintain the temperature of their bodies as they sit immobile at prayer. They can control their body temperatures through tummo, a form of meditation, by acting deliberately on the thermostat of the hypothalamus. Studies have shown that they manage to alter the activity of their cells and the blood pressure in their vessels. People who live above the polar circle are permanently acclimatized to the cold. Their cellular activity increases, like the Tibetan monks, but the effects are long-lasting. This process is called thermogenesis, the production of heat throughout the entire body. For many years, it was thought that the Siberian people's primary defense against the cold was raw food, like certain animals which store proteins in a type of brown fat, releasing them when it's very cold. Today, some researchers think that this could be a genetic adaptation, transmitted from one generation to the next. This ability would enable people to safely withstand a winter's night, for example, to guard a herd of reindeer. Coming from a comfortable European culture, Dr. Cauchy did not have the secret weapons of the people who live in extreme cold. As a prisoner of Kanjiralawe, he knew that he no longer controlled his body temperature. It was on automatic pilot. To survive through to the morning, he had to repeat the same paltry but indispensable movements. He had to keep active to produce heat, wave his arms to send warm blood to his hands, clench his fingers, and keep an eye on them to stop any signs of frostbite. And above all, he had to constantly monitor the extent to which the cold had penetrated his body.
On a l'impression que le corps essaie de ramener
You feel like your body is trying to bring everything it can to the center.
On sent ces espèces de vasoconstriction aussi périphériques.
Everything closes
Tout se
down.
referme. On sent les températures
You feel the
des
temperature in your
doigts,
fingers
des
and
pieds
feet
qui
drop.
diminuent. Voilà, on est dans une
You're in a
phase
phase of
de
desperate
lutte un petit
struggle.
peu désespérée.
In
En
fact,
fait, je
I
me
was
suis
seeing
vu
myself
en
as a
situation
guinea
de
pig.
cobaye, mais
But in
là,
the
dans
state
l'état
I was in,
où j'étais,
survival took over.
c'est vraiment la survie a pris le dessus, quoi. Je me suis
I then looked at
considéré comme
myself
un homme
as a simple human
basique,
body, and everything else was
et tout le
secondary.
reste est passé derrière.
Despite his efforts, he felt the cold gradually take over his fingers, turning them numb and stiff. In self-defense, the brain had given instructions to stop providing blood to the extremities. The fingers, ears, nose, and even the skin on the surface of the head were no longer supplied by the heat pump. In a case like this, the blood flow to the body's extremities decreases and is concentrated in the head and trunk to provide a blood supply to the vital organs, the brain, heart, lungs, and liver. The hands and feet are sacrificed, the arteries contract, and the blood flow diminishes. This is called vasoconstriction. Veins close at the wrists and ankles, stopping circulation to the feet and hands and redirecting the blood towards the heart without cooling down. The risk is obviously that the tissues no longer supplied with blood freeze, then die. This is why the self-defense mechanism results in the sacrifice of the extremities. Emmanuel Cauchy's obsession, alone on the summit in a glacial night, was to save his hands. To keep them dry, he had to avoid touching snow at all costs. He used his feet to dig a hole that would shelter him from the wind.
J'essayais de
I tried to
d'obtenir une
achieve an optimal
consommation
consumption.
optimale, c'est-à-dire
In
de
other words,
dépenser le
to
moins
expend to the
possible,
least amount of
mais
energy
juste ce qu'il fallait pour
possible,
garder
but
cette
enough to keep
température
my
au-dessus de
temperature
35
above
degrés.
35 degrees
Et
centigrade.
pour ça, eh bien,
To do that, I gave
je me
myself
donnais
blocks of
des espèces
time, fractions during which I
temps,
clapped my hands, dug
de
my
fractions
hole,
pendant lesquelles
and when I couldn't
je
go
tapais,
on,
je faisais
because
mon
of
trou.
course at
Et quand je
6,000
n'en pouvais
meters you
plus,
don't
parce que
breathe
bien
very
sûr à
well,
6000 mètres on
I
respire
would
mal,
sit down.
je
I
m'asseyais,
counted in
je
my
comptais
head for a certain
dans ma
amount of
tête
time,
pour
and then I got
un
up
temps
and
limité
started
au
my
bout duquel je
exercises
me
again.
relevais et je recommençais mes exercices.
In the middle of the dark, icy night, a small lamp he found in the bottom of his bag became a valuable ally, almost a friend. He had to use it sparingly, illuminate just enough to examine his numb fingers and make sure there were no signs of frostbite. And could he keep control of his shuddering body? The doctor knew that shivering, the violent reflexive muscle contractions, were exhausting his energy supply. And yet, with all the willpower in the world, it was impossible to stop them. He had to overcome the need to urinate, so as not to waste the few precious calories he had left. But vasoconstriction puts pressure on the kidneys, and the need becomes unbearable. He also had to overcome the desire to look at his watch. When he thought he saw the sky getting lighter in the east, his hopes were raised, only to be dashed. It was just 11 p.m. The night had only just begun. In this harrowing solitude, time was slowing down. Back at camp, everyone had returned to their tents. Cecile was getting ready for bed. She was anxious for a moment, but it quickly passed. Emmanuel must have been held up on his way down.
Je savais très bien, de toute façon, qu'elle ne pourrait pas déclencher de secours avant le lendemain et que je n'aurais pas droit à l'hélicoptère ou quoi que ce soit. J'étais trop haut. Donc voilà, j'étais de toute façon livré à moi-même. Je savais très bien aussi que les Sherpas, les Dolpopas qui étaient en bas ne pourraient pas venir jusqu'à moi.
The wind picked up in the middle of the night. A light breeze, less than 20 kilometers per hour, is enough to dramatically increase the effects of cold. This is known as the wind chill factor. It is the power of the wind to cool the body. That night, with the light wind, the temperature as felt by the prisoner of Kanjiralawe had dropped by another 10 degrees. The explanation is simple. With no wind, the heat produced by the body is kept around the body, forming a fragile insulating layer. But contact with the ice and snow, or the effects of the wind, can destroy this insulation, and precious calories are lost. The thicker the clothing, the better the insulating power. However, on that night, the mountain climber's poorly fitting jacket let in the cold air. He found a piece of rope in his bag and tied it around his waist, trapping the warm air. The effect was immediate. Each calorie saved meant a few extra seconds of survival. He had other resources in his bag of tricks. A small energy bar, 21 grams of fast carbohydrates, fuel for his body. The calorific effect of eating is twofold. Initially, digestion produces calories, and then the nutrients re-energize the metabolism. But the effects were short-lived, and there was nothing left to prevent the shivering doctor's organism from drifting towards hypothermia. Nothing? Well, almost. Because just as he felt his strength ebbing away, on the verge of sinking into a peaceful but fatal lethargy, the doctor sensed that his mind alone could still keep his body in check. He held on to his memories of his wife and 2 children, those he did not want to leave behind. Not yet. As he was no longer sure he would make it through the night, Emmanuel Cauchy took a picture of himself to leave a last trace for his family.
Alors là, cette photo,
I took this photo during the night,
une photo que j'ai prise là, dans la nuit, quand je commençais à vraiment dépérir. J'étais encore dans un état où j'ai eu l'idée de la faire. Je l'aurais pas fait après. Et je me suis pris en photo en me disant quand même, si un jour on me retrouve et puis
they would at least have this last photo of
je suis
me.
plus de ce monde, on aura au moins cette photo, cette dernière photo de moi, et je pensais à ma famille.
Now he was face to face with the question he had been asking for so long. Why do certain organisms survive extreme cold while others don't? The mystery he'd observed several times during his work in Chamonix. During the winter of 1999, for example, 2 Scottish mountain climbers were trapped in a storm at 4,000 meters. For 4 days, they struggled to survive in 100-kilometer-per-hour winds. When the helicopter arrived to lift them out, only one of them was alive. His name is Jamie Andrew. His story amazed Emmanuel Cauchy, who followed his entire convalescence. When Jamie was taken to the Chamonix hospital, his first look seemed to say, "What miracle brought me here? How did I survive?" When the hospital staff warmed his body, it was rocked by spasms, but his heart held out. His limbs were frozen up to his elbows and to his knees.
I asked him his name, he told me Jamie.
Constriction of the blood vessels was extreme, and the entire forearm was affected. As the blood withdrew from the tissues, ice crystals formed inside the cells, damaging them severely. In a case like this, cells literally implode under the effect of the cold. Jamie's hands and feet were amputated several weeks after he was rescued. It's likely that if his organism had not sacrificed his extremities, he would have succumbed to hypothermia. Hypothermia describes a condition in which the core temperature is too low to ensure vital functions. In man, hypothermia starts at 35 degrees Celsius and becomes serious below 32 degrees.
Can you tell me anything else? Were you with your friends when you fell?
Enrico Another accident victim had fallen into a crevice. Very quickly, his temperature dropped severely as his blood continued to flow to his frozen limbs. During hypothermia, the heart is very fragile. If stressed, it can fail. This is called fibrillation. To avoid cardiac arrest, the body must be reheated slowly. For Enrico, cardiac arrest was prevented, and he did not suffer any lasting effects from the hypothermia.
Open your eyes for me.
For others, it was fatal. Dr. Cauchy knew that sometimes the line between life and death was no greater than 0.5 degree centigrade.
Bien sûr, je pense très souvent que j'aurais pu ne pas revenir. Ça s'est joué en fait à pas grand-chose et je me rends compte complètement que tout s'est joué sur la psychologie, sur la façon j'avais décidé de me battre, enfin mon désir de rester en vie. Ça s'est joué à pas grand-chose. À la fin de la nuit, là j'ai senti vraiment que j'en passerais pas deux. J'ai senti que j'avais vraiment puisé jusqu'à la dernière goutte de sucre, de glucogène dans mon corps. Et j'avais dû certainement attaquer aussi les cellules musculaires pour essayer de me défendre.
The doctor observed worrying signs in his body just as dawn broke on Kanjiralawe. A drowsiness, a disturbing desire to let himself slip off into a final sleep. When subjected to stress, our brain creates a shield against aggression. Monoamines, a compound of hormones secreted by the neurons. Monoamines are also used in the pharmaceutical industry in antidepressant drugs. Initially, this magic cocktail helps fight against the cold, but as soon as it stops acting, the brain becomes lethargic.
Et après ça, je me suis vu rentrer dans la phase de en dessous de 35, under 35 degrees, where I started to shiver constantly. J'ai eu les hallucinations et j'étais à deux doigts de rentrer dans la phase de non-retour de 31 degrés où on a des hallucinations et on arrête de trembler, quoi.
Dr. Cauchy recognized the signs of hypothermia. One voice whispering that it would feel so good to go to sleep, another, like an imaginary double, urging him to fight. He knew from reading medical books that mental confusion is a sign of severe hypothermia, followed shortly by coma. In this condition, the lines between consciousness, madness, and death are indistinct. When it was discovered in the morning that the doctor had still not returned, the alert was sounded. But no helicopters were available for 48 hours. His colleagues looked for Emmanuel Cauchy's tracks, but they disappeared into the mountains. The last few minutes before sunrise are always the coldest of the night. At any moment, a survivor can slip into a coma. And with a few more minutes, a few calories or a few degrees more or less, the pendulum can shift towards survival. Emmanuel Cauchy made a final effort to take control of his body, overcome by convulsions. But he still had to find his way down. Furiously, he searched through his first aid kit. He needed a tool, any tool to save himself. These folding scissors might do. traced the wall that had imprisoned him the day before. But this time, he held the key to his escape, the small pair of scissors which he used as a tiny ice axe, carving steps in the ice for his hands and feet. "50 meters more and he'd be free. But his body was numb with cold, his movements were stiff, his feet uncertain. One slip on the hard ice would be fatal.
Tomorrow's a day off, so I'm going to go with them. Maybe we'll search towards the cliff.
Non, mais Guy et lui, il y coupait mal parce que
If he's not
s'il est
back,
pas
he's
rentré,
pretty much sure
c'est
that
sûr
something
qu'il
bad
lui est
happened
arrivé
to
une
him.
merde, quoi.
He had made it. Emmanuel Cauchy was free from his own trap. After struggling for 12 hours, he reached base camp and his friends, who photographed his smile. At that moment, all he felt was relief. But the night spent in the extreme cold left an indelible mark on his body. Emmanuel Cauchy is now at home with his children in Chamonix. His wife Cécile has not forgotten Kandjira Lawe. For her, that night triggered a new awareness.
Everything fell apart. You think of your children. You ask yourself how they will live without their father. And I was lost. I couldn't imagine it. I'd never asked myself if one day something could ever happen to Manu. For me, Manu rescued people in the mountains. He was the man who saved others. Nothing would happen to him. He's lucky. He's extremely lucky. Nothing can happen to him. And then, wham.
Joli celui-là.
Nearly 10 years have gone by, and for Dr. Cauchy, this extreme experience now makes sense.
L'expérience que j'ai vécue, je l'ai un petit peu cherchée de façon inconsciente. Je ne sais pas si je l'ai cherché vraiment pour voir moi-même où mon corps serait capable d'aller vis-à-vis du froid. En tout cas, je suis vraiment parti pour me pousser un peu plus loin dans mes possibilités de me défendre. Un petit peu comme Alain Bombard part sur la mer avec son radeau pour voir combien de temps il va survivre. Moi, je suis parti un petit peu sur ce sommet en me disant je ne sais pas très bien si je vais redescendre sain et sauf. Je vais y arriver, mais quand même, j'avais un doute. Donc, je me suis j'ai un peu poussé la machine, quoi.
En fait, le plus dur, ça va être pour faire les... C'est pas dans les contraintes, quoi, le plus dur. Ça va être dans les... Et en plus...
Jamie, whose hands and feet were amputated, never gave up mountain climbing. Dr. Cauchy visited him in Scotland to film his convalescence, and was there when he returned to the Mont Blanc Massif.
There we go. Voilà. Okay.
Cette histoire, bien sûr, ça m'a apporté énormément d'expérience sur moi-même, sur la science, sur les réactions, sur mes réactions, et puis aussi sur la façon dont doivent vivre les gens que je récupère par rapport à l'hypothermie. Donc, je les comprends beaucoup mieux.
Ouais, super. Très bien. Équilibre-toi.
Jamie never gave up his activities, and today his zeal for life is unchanged, as is his passion for the mountains. He and Emmanuel have something in common. They both adventured into a little-known zone where life hangs from the fragile thread of willpower.
Voilà. Les pieds bien à plat, voilà, super.
C'est difficile avec le âne.
Je crois que ça a été une barrière dans ma vie parce que jusqu'à ce moment, c'est vrai, je faisais partie des gens qui aimaient prendre des risques, mais pousser le bouchon très loin. Et donc c'est vrai que c'était un tournant dans ma vie, c'est-à-dire que j'ai décidé d'arrêter de prendre des risques pour ce genre de choses. J'étais un aventurier, maintenant l'aventure, je la vis ailleurs, je la vis plus physiquement en mettant mon corps en péril, quoi.
For Emmanuel Cauchy, the night on Kanjiralawe has not yet yielded all its secrets. At a critical moment, what was the role of willpower? What chemical circuits did it control in the core of his brain? And when someone is floating at the threshold of unconsciousness, is the body able to make autonomous decisions independent of willpower to bring it back to life?
The best answer I have is to understand why, at a crucial moment, someone lets themselves go, why there are people who survive, why there are people who give up. There's a mental aspect which plays a preponderant role. Qui joue un rôle prépondérant.
The role of the mind in withstanding cold is a fascinating enigma, which points to fields of research for the future. As a medical expert, Dr. Cauchy continues to explore them at the IFREMONT, the Institute of Mountain Medicine he has just founded.
Cauchy@ifremont.fr. On a l'impression d'être un peu pionnier parce que ce qui est intéressant, c'est comme un alpiniste.
What's interesting for a mountain climber isn't to go the same way as other climbers. What's interesting is to discover new routes. And here we're on a new path. All the extreme cold experts are passionate about this branch of medicine, which makes sense, as we still have everything to discover.
Devoting himself to science, yes, but provided he remains a man of action. Nothing will discourage him from that.
Je vais le prendre. Ouais. Allez, allez là.
Like Icarus, Cauchy burnt his wings, but he learned his lesson. And today, he still flies to the rescue of those who, like himself, can't resist the call of the mountain.